Think of me as your strategic friend who always tells you the truth. That friend who will hold your hand with empathy, but also tell you it's important to have clarity and do the work. You need to work, you need to be available, you need to take your life seriously. And I think that sometimes we get caught up in our thoughts, in our wishes and ideas, but we don't push through because we're not in the right environment. So we ask people for advice, and the advice that we get come out of fear or reservations, and then you think maybe I'm not the right person to do that, maybe I'm not equipped, maybe I'm not competent, so I shouldn't even try. Someone who can really go deep with us in our wishes so that they can become reality. And I think this is what I'm trying to do with people who feel that they're ready, that they've been feeling stuck or not very satisfied about where they are in life and where they want to go. They don't really know exactly where it is that they want to go, but they do have a little idea of things they want. So sometimes you speak to people and you ask them, what would you like to do? And they will tell you all the things that they don't want to do. But then it's very difficult for some people to just say, I want this. Notice that. And I think I have an idea of why, but I can help you shape that language. I can help you believe that you want something and that you're going to get it. And I can help you get it because most of the things that I wanted, I worked toward it. I worked towards getting them, and I got them. Sometimes they appeared in my life in a way that I was not expecting, not in the timing that I was expecting, not in the form that I was expecting. But in retrospect, I realized that's exactly what I wished for, that's what I wanted, that's the message I sent to the universe. And this is what I got. I think it's important to voice these deep desires in terms of career, where you see yourself, where you want to live, what you really enjoy doing, what brings you joy. The advice and guidance that I can give and the work that I do, I want to place joy at the center. I've had many jobs, many roles, many things, but what I always say is that I always wanted to tell stories, real stories, and I didn't know how, I didn't know where, but I wanted to tell stories. When I was a child, I had this deep desire of telling stories. Sometimes I wanted to be on stage, and then I had this sort of fear of being seen, and so that if people see me, then they're gonna think that I'm a certain way, and I'm not too sure about that. I don't know how to handle it. It's followed me for a long time. But one thing that was very critical is the support that I've had in my family and environment. And from the start, I said, I want to tell stories, but I don't know what I want to do. I remember my mother was like, if you'd like to tell stories, you could be a journalist. And I was like, yeah, I could be a journalist. Besides being a journalist, I also wanted to be a filmmaker and tell stories with images. One thing that I can tell you is that I was a journalist, so this happened. The filmmaker part was still on the way. I don't know if it's ever going to happen because I don't really know if this is really what I want to do now, but I still have this idea that images and telling stories are important. So how I got from wanting to become a journalist to actually become one was a long journey of trials and errors. But one thing for sure was that I knew that I could become a journalist. I knew that I had to learn. I knew that I was not someone who was really much into learning by sitting and having long hours of theories, especially for something that I thought was really learned by practice, like journalism. And so I started writing different ways. I started interviewing family members, friends. I started blogs. And then I studied in the US, and there, I started writing a little bit for a university gazette. I was also sending these emails full of stories about what was happening to me, what my day-to-day life was. And I had a journal as well, and I would journal a lot. Really reporting from what I was witnessing. And it was a critical year for the world because I moved to the US in August 2001, and then September 11th happened. There was a lot to witness, especially being inside the US. I remember my mother, who I would talk to on the phone, who would tell me Have you checked this? Did you see that? Do you know this? At the time, I really didn't understand. Being inside the US, I was in Minneapolis, and the type of news we were getting and how polarized the media was. What stories they were telling us had nothing to do with the stories that my mother was talking about. At the time, she was living in Ivory Coast and working for an international organization. And actually, she was a lot more informed about global perspective. And I was more in the local news and our president is a hero and we're going to go and attack this country and be better. And all these perspectives, they were shaping me more and more. I remember that even at that time, I had this idea of journalism, but I also wanted to work in international organizations. I thought this was a pathway to have an impact, and if possible, a positive one. I was 18, turned 19, and you realize that sometimes you are in an environment where they're telling you stories that are not necessarily true, but they are your truth or their truth at that moment from that perspective. And you have the rest of the world telling a different story about the same event, what to believe, how to believe it, what type of tactics are used to shape the way we see the world. All these things were preparing me for becoming the journalist I wanted to be. Always be alert, open your mind, and have a critical mind. It's not necessarily easy. I think we're now in a different era. This was early 2000, now it's 2025. We're bombarded by information and stories, different ways, very fast, very short, and it's hard to know what to believe and what we consume or question it. But keep in mind that it's one story and there are different perspectives. And listen to most of the perspective, maybe all if you have enough time and it's not too triggering, then try to understand the narrative that is what it's shaping, where it's gonna go, what is the strategy behind it. You can better understand yourself, where you position yourself, and as a professional, where you're trying to go to or where you're trying to get to. I wanted to work in a more international environment. I studied in France. Before that, I studied in Ivory Coast in a mixed French system. I knew that international meant English, at least in terms of language. It came from my mother. She was very intentional about telling me, if you want to work in this field, you need to speak English. People have different opinions about that, but I would not be the person who is gonna fight you in being a French speaker and you need to speak French and Francophonie is so important. That's not my role. If you want to get these jobs, you need to speak English. It's unfair, and within the system you will have a lot of frustration because you would see that English speakers can get roles in Francophone space without having the level that they expect you to have in English. But whilst we're trying to shift this dynamic and to change the world, we need to equip ourselves with the right tools. So first things first, learn English. Learn it properly. I think especially now you can find a lot of tutorials, you can find a lot of teachers online. Most importantly, practice. You can have language exchange. If you have a bit of budget, you can also go to places where they speak English, if possible alone, so you're forced to speak. At the time, there were a lot of exchange programs between universities. This is what I've used, and that's how I ended up going to the US for a year, and that's also where I really practiced and I really learned English because I learned it at school. I learned it at school in a Francophone environment where when you try to speak English with a proper accent, people laugh in class and they want you to speak like this and make sure that the accent is like that. And I was not having it. I was not interested in having a French accent in anything. I think accents are beautiful. Obviously, I do have a French accent, but I didn't want this heavy. I think sometimes being stubborn is your best asset because you don't get dragged into this sort of group mentality and you do it yourself. And so what I would say is learn English. Yeah, no choice. Practice, practice, practice. Make sure you practice, you find the right people, you travel. You don't have to go far, but you travel and meet people who are really native speakers because you would learn things that you won't learn in books, expressions, because language has so much to do with also the understanding of a society. The other day I was listening to this Nigerian sociologist, and I would put her name in the description because I can't remember it now. She's Yoruba, and was talking about the fact that the concept of gender in her language doesn't really exist. For brother and sister, you say sibling. For your daughter, you say my child. And it was more age that had an impact in her culture. And I was really thinking, and this is something that I really defend, the fact that languages, they shape how we see the world and our perspectives. The more languages you have access to, the more perspectives you have access to. So it helps you to have a broad range of understanding of the world, but a broader range of understanding of yourself. Self is very important. I'm not talking about egocentric self. I'm talking about self within that world. Where do I sit in the world, or where do I want to be? And so learn languages. Another thing is better understand what these organizations do, how they do it, what is their mission, because there's so many organizations and there's so many type of things. Some are religion-based, some others are within the United Nations system, others are philanthropic, which means that it's a wealthy person decides to use part of their wealth to support other people and have an impact. Others are part of a corporate or business that has made a lot of money, and then they have a section of their work where they decide that we did so much damage, we polluted so many places, that now we want to give some money to help them. Okay, I'm a bit cynical, but more or less that's what they do. I would say that sometimes you just don't see all the skills that you have and how you can transfer them in that sector. I can help you see that. Networking is important, visibility is important, but really what I want to say is clarity and strategy are the most important things. What it is that I want to achieve, how can I go about it? Who are my best allies? And what do I need to learn to get there? If you get to do this work, and it's a life learning experience, but you find the right people to support you and guide you in that journey, I can guarantee it's going to be a fulfilling one. Also, achievement doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the job you applied for, but through that process, it can lead you to understanding better what your worth is in that market, what you need, where you want to be, and shape another path that is even more interesting and that you never thought about. So I would say what is very important for me is to establish a relationship of trust where we know that we're going to be supported and guided. This is the most important thing for me. Sometimes it's going to feel uncomfortable because of the type of questions that I will ask that will make you go back into this loop or not being sure about what you want. But trust the process. Trust it, because we are actually getting somewhere. Feeling stuck, I think when you get to that stage of feeling it, it's because you've already started the path of getting out of that space. You can feel stuck for years and not even understand that you're stuck. And that's the moment that you start shifting. You're peeling off these layers of not understanding. I may have outgrown this role. I'm not feeling that I'm in the right space. There are a lot of barriers that I feel that I will never be able to overcome. Sometimes it seems big, but it's actually very small. You just need the right person to help you understand that. And that person is me. Being creative is not really something that you learn. It's something that comes from within. You create things. You wake up and have an idea and try it. Personally, if I am not able to express myself and that creative side, there is part of me that is just dead or dying. Even when I was working for international organizations, it was very intense and busy, I always had my creative sides. Most of the time, I was hired because I also had this creative side. Very often, I would apply for roles for the United Nations, and I thought people are very judgmental. Some colleagues will not understand that you have different lives and personalities. So I would put my blog in private, my YouTube videos in private, and go into application mode, hide that part of myself. When I was hired, I would slowly start to come back to who I was and open my other spaces back. But more and more I realized that I was hired because I had these sides. I was not the communication specialist that would come in and just produce press releases and just send them and call journalists. I had a different way of operating. I would try to understand what the story is about. How can I shape the profile of this person? What could interest journalists? Because I was a journalist before, I knew how to do that. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to put my stuff out. This is how it's going to be. They're going to go and Google me and see all these aspects. They will decide whether I'm the right person they want to have in their team or not. And also sometimes you also need to accept that. Maybe they don't want you, but maybe you don't want them either. It's really okay, we need money, we need a job, we need to pay our bills. But at the same time, do you want to work in a place where they don't accept you fully? Is it a place where you're going to thrive and be fulfilled? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. This is really an interview process, for example. It's really a sort of moment where we check each other out. This is something I've realized, I learned to accept. I am not for everybody, and not all jobs are for me. And the right jobs are going to come to me. It's also okay to let it go. You don't need to be accepted by people who don't respect you, really. And so, barriers, yes, but also be very clear about where you really want to go. Sometimes you sit in some interviews and you really see that clearly. I don't feel the vibe, I don't like these people, I didn't like that they asked me this question, I didn't like their reactions, sometimes they're not very engaged, sometimes you fail to reply well and that everybody's looking, nah, she's not the one. And sometimes you're really trying hard, but at the same time you know that you don't even want the role. So I think we need to be very honest with ourselves and try and see what's really worth it and what matters most at that time. The other day I was speaking with my mother is a very important person in my life, but also in my professional journey. I think she's a role model in many aspects. She used to tell me that when she was younger, she would get these very good roles and then leave, and people were like, why is she doing this? And she knew why. They didn't know. They're not her. And I really respect her for that. I was laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. I was trying to explain the story to her. And even when I think about it, it makes me laugh. And it's not even a funny story. Very often, I would see roles that seem interesting. And I would tell my mother, oh, I saw this role and I want to apply for it. I would show her the website, especially the team page. And then, sorry, and then I'm starting. I'm starting laughing again. And the team page, most organizations have these team pages that are, sometimes they have very beautiful photos, sometimes the photos are not that great, but it's not exactly about the type of photos, it's the type of people who are on that page. I'm not going to go into more details. You look at the page, you look at me, and she would be like, they will never hire you, you shouldn't even apply. So, actually, I think, and it's, in French, it was like, non, mais ils vont jamais te prendre. And I would always be like, why not? I got the skills. Look at the job description. Why wouldn't they hire me? And she knew exactly what she meant. And I don't know. I would go for roles. I never really saw myself as someone that wouldn't be hired because I'm a woman, because I'm black. I wouldn't be hired because I'm African. I wouldn't be hired because I have an accent. I would just think, oh, I do have the skills. This is a role that I'm interested in. And then I was just thinking I'm just gonna apply. I would send my CV, never hear from them. Never hear from them. That was clear. But because this is someone who understands the world in a way in which she experienced it, it makes me laugh because even though she would say, no, they would never hire you, I would apply because this is the way I am. But she's right. We're not alone in this world. And so there are perceptions and biases that prevent us from getting some roles that probably we deserve. But the reality is they're not hiring us for a reason. but do you think that you would thrive in that environment? And sometimes it's a blessing that they didn't even look at your profile or they were not interested. I've also been hired in places where I was the first black person doing this, the first black woman in the management team, the first African. It is taxing. There is a lot of emotional labor. It's tiring, but it was transformative for the organization. Some colleagues had aha moments. I grew as an individual, understanding that I needed to work around my patients, not taking on things that do not belong to me, to get into an environment and end up having this role of educating people on things they can't see. It was really draining and tiring, and I stopped doing it because that's not my role. But I think just my presence was helping others questioning their biases. I think sometimes one person who gives you the chance, believes in you, one person who is more daring than others, and that person allows you to enter some spaces where they never allowed anyone like you, never listened to you, never saw the talent you had. Most of the time you get to these spaces and realize a lot of people are there because of the way they look, the schools they went to, but they don't have the skills that you have. They don't necessarily have the experience that you have. They never did the travels that you did. They get the role. And you struggle to even get that role, which sometimes is not even the level where you're supposed to be. Don't be frustrated. This is just one part of your story. It doesn't mean that you will be defined by that moment. But I think it's good to look around and see the positive things you can learn from. What are the lessons you can take forward? What are the things you would do if you get to a position with more power or leadership? What are the shifts you're going to make? Sometimes it's also horrible. You get to these organizations, you're the first this, the first that, and they thought that they were hiring a puppet and someone would look good on the website because it's part of diversity, yay! And you're the diversity sort of person, but they forget that you are a human. They forget that you're a professional, that you're going to come in, that you're going to question things, that you're going to work, that you're going to transform, that you may make them feel uncomfortable. You may yourself be uncomfortable. And these are the hardest places to be in. I've experienced that. I was very happy to leave, but it was a good lesson learned. That team page tells you a lot about the place, and whatever reaction you get from that page can also tell you more or less how the interview process is going to be if you ever get to that stage. I believe that strategy doesn't necessarily mean 1, 2, 3, and if you apply 1, 2, 3, this is exactly the result that you're going to get. But it's more around gathering or collecting your energy, not spending too much energy everywhere and also outside of yourself. More discipline and more clarity of the mind. And that's really what I want to make sure that people have. And so I take the time to understand you. I take the time to understand your thought process. And together, based on who you are, we see how we can help you thrive. That's more what I'm interested in. I can transform people. I transform them within who they are, what they can achieve. I don't change people and make them become something else. That's not what I'm going to do. I think you will be the leader of that transformation. I'm just pushing some buttons, opening some doors, opening your mind with joy at the center.